in June of 2007 when Adrian Fenty, who's the mayor of DC, announced that I was his pick as the city's first school chancellor. What was widely the reaction here in DC was, what on God's green earth is Adrian Fenty thinking, hiring this 37-year-old Korean girl from Toledo, Ohio, who's never run a school, much less a school district. And while that was sort of rippling through the city, I had a small contingent of people from Toledo cheering me on. So being born and raised as an Ohio girl, I very much appreciate this honor tonight from the Glenn School. I thought, I was sort of reading up there the inspiring citizenship, developing leadership motto up there, and so I thought that tonight I would sort of frame my remarks to the Glenn Fellows and talk a little bit about leadership and public service and the lessons that I've learned over the last 3 years. But let me first start by giving you a little bit of background about the city and the school district when I came into this job 3 years ago. At the time, we were largely known as the lowest performing and most dysfunctional school district in the country. We were the only school district in the United States that was on high risk status with the U.S. Department of Education, mostly for the misuse of federal funds. We had an achievement gap in the city between where the white students were performing and where the black students were performing of 70 percentage points. That's 70 percentage point achievement gap. If you were a ninth grader entering high school in one of our city's comprehensive high schools, you had a likelihood of a 9% chance of graduating from college. And we had a circumstance in which of all of the eighth graders in the city, according to the NAEP examination, which is a national examination, only 8% of our children were operating on grade level in mathematics. 8%. Which means that 92% of our kids did not have the skills and knowledge necessary to be productive members of society. And perhaps the most disheartening data was about our little ones. And basically what that data said was that when we got kids into the system in kindergarten, they were essentially on par with kids who looked like them in other cities across the country. So not with their suburban counterparts, but with kids who looked like them in cities like Philadelphia, Dallas, Houston, San Francisco, across the country. The problem was that the longer they stayed in our school district, the further behind they fell. So much so that by the time they were in the third grade, they were far below their urban counterparts. And this was an interesting statistic, which is by the time our children reached the fourth grade, they were in a position where the poor black fourth graders in New York City were operating 2 full grade levels ahead of the poor black fourth graders in Washington, D.C. So for everyone who wanted to blame the low academic achievement levels of our children on single-parent households and the poor neighborhoods and lack of health care and all those things, what I said was, the last time I checked, the poverty in Harlem did not look all that different from the poverty in Southeast Washington, D.C., but the kids in Harlem are 2 full grade levels ahead of our kids. So basically what it meant was that if you were a kid in this system, you were essentially better off staying at home every day than you were coming to school, where you would fall further and further behind. That was the reality. So faced with this reality, I set about trying to change the sense of possibility in the city and create a vision for what was possible. And it was interesting because in my first few months on the job, I would often come out to events like this and talk to citizens and say, this is what we want to do, this is what we want to achieve, this is what we aspire to. And people would often come up to me after the event and say, we really like you. You are enthusiastic, you seem very smart and committed, and then they'd say, but we don't think you're going to be successful. And I'd always say, gee, thanks. Why do you think so? And they'd say to me, because schools are a reflection of the communities that they're in. And as long as we have the economic disparity in this country that we do, we're going to continue to have the educational inequality, because you're just going to have rich neighborhoods, and in those neighborhoods you're going to have lots of resources, lots of money, lots of support for kids, and you're going to have great schools. And in other parts of the country you're going to have poorer communities with less resources and less support for kids. And in those neighborhoods you're going to have poor performing schools. That's the way capitalism works. And I never agreed with that contention, but I could also never really figure out how to explain to people why that didn't have to be the reality. And about a year and a half ago, I had an interesting experience. I had the good fortune of having dinner with Warren Buffett. Now, never in my life, people, did I ever think that I would get to meet Warren Buffett. But there I was in Omaha one night, having a steak dinner with Mr. Buffett, and he looked at me and he said, "You know, Michelle, it is very easy to fix the problems in public education in America today." And I looked at him and I said, "Wonderful, Mr. Buffett. Please tell me how to do this so I can run back to DC and fix the school system." And he said, "All you have to do is make private schools illegal and assign every child to a public school by random lottery." So think about this for a minute. If we actually did that in Washington, D.C., which would mean that every ambassador's child, every CEO's child, every congressman's child, and the president's 2 children got assigned to a random DCPS school by lottery, which would mean that a huge portion of them would be going across the river to Anacostia every day, I guarantee you that you would never see a faster movement of resources from one side of the city to the other as you would in that circumstance. And I also guarantee you that very quickly we would have a system of excellent schools. So the question in my mind is not, is it possible to accomplish this feat of making sure that every kid gets an excellent education in a great school? The question is, do we as the adults in this city have the wherewithal that it would take to make this a reality for every kid? And the answer to that question to date in this entire country has been no. But I actually feel like we are on the verge of a sea change. From the president to the Secretary of Education to our mayor, you're beginning to see public leaders who are taking a stand on these issues. And it really is going to create a significant transformation. So let me get straight to my lessons learned here on leadership. There are 3 of them. The first one is one that was given to me by Joel Klein, who is a mentor of mine. He's the chancellor of the New York City Public Schools. And he actually got me into this whole mess because he recommended to Adrian Fenty that I be hired for this job. So he feels very guilty, and he calls me about once a week and he checks in, "How you doing, Michelle?" And I remember that in my first couple of weeks on the job, I was driving home, it was raining, and he calls me on my phone and he says, "Michelle, I'm going to give you some really important advice." I said, "Okay." So I pull over to the side of the road. I said, "Go ahead, sir." And he says, "First thing is, do you have a boyfriend?" And I said, "No, I don't." At the time, I didn't. And he said, "Okay, go get one." I said, "Okay." And he said, "Because let me just tell you that this is the loneliest job that a person could possibly have. And you need someone at home who loves you unconditionally. At the end of a hard day of getting screamed and yelled at, you need somebody to say, 'Honey, you're not crazy. They're crazy. You are okay.'" He said, "Without that level of support in your personal life, you're never going to make it. So go get out on the dating scene." So I never thought I'd be getting love life advice from Joel Klein, but there it was. I said, "Okay, I got it." He said, "My second piece." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "is you have to lead from the front." And he sounded so definitive and so clear when he said it that I said, "Sir, that is very helpful advice. It's very sage. Thank you so much." I hung up the phone. I got back on the road. I was like, I have no idea what that guy's talking about. But I didn't want to admit it because he's a smart guy. And I actually didn't realize what he was talking about until a few months later when I announced that we were going to close 23 schools in the district. And let me just say as a lesson to all of you, if you quickly want to become the least popular person in a city, all you have to do is say you're closing a school, much less 23 schools, which is what we announced. And it was interesting because I went to literally hundreds of community meetings about these school closures. Every single night we were up, we were talking about it, people yelling and screaming. And people would say to me in these meetings, "Chancellor Rhee, I went to this school. My mother went to this school. This school is an anchor of the community. Do you really believe that we need one more boarded up building in this neighborhood?" I mean, very emotional arguments, but arguments that also made sense. And it was difficult to be able to persevere through that through that disappointment, through that angst and anguish. But at the end of the day, we knew that these were the right decisions to make. And it was interesting because about a year later, after we had made all the school closure decisions, a woman came up to me one day and said, "Do you remember me? See this face?" She said, "I was yelling at you all the time, throwing things at you and giving to me." She's like, "I just wanted to let you know that you were right." She said, "The school that we are in now is a much better school for children." And I couldn't see it back then, but I now understand why you made that decision. And it's at that point that I actually understood what Joel Klein was saying, because if you get mired in the mess of decisions and sort of start getting pulled in one direction or another, you sometimes lose sight of the fact that sometimes as a leader you have to be out in front. You have to be able to see things that other people can't see immediately, knowing you're heading in the right direction and knowing that eventually people will also see what you see. But that you have to be out in front of this sometimes, and that I think is an important lesson. My second lesson is that it is okay not to be liked. I'm really, really good at this lesson right now. Let me just tell you, I've gotten very good at it. And I say this because it's interesting. I was at a conference about a year ago, and I ran into a very high-ranking official in the Democratic Party. He's a very well-known guy, and he said, "Michelle, I'm going to give you some unsolicited advice." I said, "Okay, what is it?" And he said, "You need to soften up. Soften, soften, soften." He said, "You are always so hardcore and you talk about all the bad things that are happening in the district and the bad news." And he said, "And when you do that, you make people feel bad." He said, "People don't want to feel bad, they want to feel good. So if you just soften up a little bit, then you can have so many more people behind your efforts." And I looked at him and I said, "I totally disagree with you." I said, for far too long in this city, we have been willing to turn a blind eye to what is happening to kids every day in classrooms in the name of harmony amongst adults so we can all feel good. And what that has produced is a system where 8% of our children are on grade level in mathematics, which is really a crime. It is criminal. So if that makes people feel bad, so be it. But it is also, I imagine, going to give people a sense of urgency about changing the situation. And that's exactly what we need, is for the adults to feel a little less comfortable and to feel a little urgency around needing to change the situation. It was interesting because a columnist from the Washington Post not too long ago wrote an article about me, and he said, "I like Michelle Rhee. I think she's doing good things for the city. I would like her to stay. And because I want her to stay, I want her to become a little nicer. Because I think that if she's a little nicer, then she will increase her longevity in the city." Warm and fuzzy, Michelle. So I, of course, called this gentleman after the column runs, and I said, "Look, you need to decide what you believe are the most important characteristics of the leader of this school system. And if you think, collaboration and cooperation and niceness are the top priorities, then you should be advocating for my ouster. Because if you want warm and fuzzy, I am not your girl." I said, "However, if you think that what we are doing is on the right track and you believe that we are making the difficult decisions that are necessary, then what you should be talking about in your columns is how we need to get over the discomfort of what's going on and embrace the fact that it's actually producing some results for kids." So that message, I think, of not being liked and it okay being unpopular is an important one in leadership, because when you are trying to affect massive systemic change, there are always going to be people who are going to have their livelihoods and their balances off kilter, and I think that it's important to be able to persevere through those challenges. And my third and last comment is that the most important thing when it comes to leadership in times like these is courage. And I say this not on my own behalf, because I actually love my job every day and I'm just doing what I think is right for kids. Really, this is on behalf of my boss, the mayor of DC, because he has exhibited more political courage over the last 3 years than I think any politician anywhere in the country. And let me just give you one example. Last year at this time, when the city was facing an $800 million deficit, budget shortfall, he decided that he was going to hold the schools harmless. And people went nuts on him. They said, what are you talking about? The school's budget makes up a huge percentage of the overall spend that we have as a city every year, and the schools are going to have to shoulder their fair share of the burden. The mayor looked up and said, no, they don't. He said, we are in the economic crisis that we are in this city and in this country because of the irresponsibility of adults. We are not going to make up for that on the backs of children. He said, so, I've been very clear since I got elected that education is my #1 priority. And when you have a priority, what that means is that oftentimes if everything else has to cut a little deeper so that you can protect the thing that matters most, then so be it. And this was not a politically correct decision to make, right? Only 20% of the voting population in DC has school-aged kids. So it wasn't a re-election ploy or anything like that. It was because he knows that in order for this city to meet its potential in the long run, we are going to have to fix the public education system. And he's solely dedicated to making sure that that happens. So it's that kind of political leadership that is necessary to propel education reform in this country forward. Let me end on this note. I believe that public education is supposed to be the great equalizer in our country. It's supposed to be the thing that ensures that it doesn't matter if you are black or white, rich or poor. We have public schools in America so that every single kid can have an equal shot in life, right? If you work hard and you do the right thing, you can live the American dream. That is not the reality that the children in Washington, D.C. have today. The reality in Washington, D.C. is that if you grow up in Georgetown versus if you grow up in Anacostia, you get two wildly different educational experiences. That's the biggest social injustice imaginable. Because essentially what that means is that we are still, in this day and age, allowing the color of a child's skin and the zip code that they live in to dictate their educational attainment levels, and therefore their life chances and their life outcomes. That goes against every single ideal that we have as a country, and every single person in this room, public servant or not, bears a responsibility to change that dynamic so that we can live up to our promise as a country of being the land of equal opportunity where every single child can get an excellent education through a public school. So I want to thank Senator Glenn, who knows a thing or two about courage in public service, to Dr. Wise from the Glenn School, and just encourage all of you to really think about what needs to happen from the everyday citizen's point of view to make sure that we can live that reality for every child in this city. Thank you.